Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Laura Rogers, and this is Joelle Farley, and this is our live SharePoint Power Hour. This is a show we do every Wednesday at 11 Central. We try to do it every single Wednesday. SharePoint Power Hour is all about things that you can do mostly out of the box in SharePoint. We are not programmers. We are not hardcore system admins. We are kind of everything in between. So those are the kind of things that we cover in Power Hour. We've done like a couple of hundred episodes by now. And if you missed it last week, Joelle and I have been reunited. She's working with me now at IW Mentor. We had gone separate ways, different companies for a few months there, about a year. And so Joelle is on my team now. So welcome back again, Joelle. And then last week we did a recap of the SharePoint Virtual Summit. And this week, Joelle's going to be talking about manage metadata. And if you are joining for the first time, as you can see in the description in YouTube, there's a link to fill out a form to request to join our Slack channel. That's where we have our lively chat going on the whole time. And for those of you who are already joined, it's iwmentor.slack.com. And we have Slack is just it's separate software. It has nothing to do with SharePoint, but it also has desktop software and it also has a phone app. And so that's what we use to chat. So everybody welcome, head on over to the Power Hour channel in there so we can just chat and ask questions. And so Joelle, what are you going to be talking about today?
So I am going to be talking about manage metadata and kind of starting at the very beginning with just like general, what is metadata and all that fun stuff. So I'll be going through that. And then the hope is that I can kind of get pretty far into some of the metadata stuff today. And then whatever I can't get to within the hour, then we can probably do another session on. So there's a lot to cover. Once you get through just how the term store works, you start getting into how do you use manage metadata. So we'll kind of start with some of that stuff and then just kind of see where we get.
Oh yeah, so right, this could be part one. Yeah, I mean,
this could be part
metadata
one.
came out in SharePoint 2010, and it's super useful and super awesome to learn and understand what the power of it. It's lately we've been talking about all these pretty new shiny things in SharePoint, but metadata is just one of those things that's been around a while, but it's good to know, and could every now and then you find little nuggets that you didn't realize that you could do with it. So
yeah,
great. So let's see, I'll switch it over to let you do your screen sharing.
Sure.
Let's see, where did it go? There we go. All right, so when you share your screen, it'll show on there.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So yeah, it's Manage Metadata 101. So definitely, I'm sure there are people listening in who have worked with Manage Metadata and familiar with it. But we are definitely going to start from the beginning. And then, like I said, hopefully build on to this, see how far we can get today, and then maybe do a couple other sessions on some more complex parts of Manage Metadata. And so I have this image here, and it's the Library of Congress. And I like to use this when I'm starting to kind of talk to people about documents and metadata and stuff like that, because as the fact says, there's 162 million items on approximately 838 miles of bookshelves. So you can imagine that in order for the Library of Congress to have any idea of what's going on inside their building, that they probably have some sort of metadata system. Of course, we know a lot of libraries do the Dewey Decimal stuff. But they have some kind of metadata to kind of help them manage all of that information that they have there. So I like to kind of use that as a neat example, a real life example, and how 162 million items. I don't know too many intranets or SharePoint sites that have that many items, but I definitely have run into some very, very large sites that have a lot of content that they're trying to keep organized. So just kind of a neat example or a neat real life thing to look at. So let's kind of talk about, let me switch over here. So one of the things that we often see with SharePoint is that people will get a document library and then they just go crazy with creating folders. And in certain situations in SharePoint, we know that folders are useful and we, have to use them. But a lot of times, kind of just using folders and only folders to organize your content can kind of do more damage than good because things are going to be harder to find. We do know that the deeper a folder structure is, the harder it is for search to give you a relevant result for that item. So I like this quote here because it says everything is designed, few things are designed well, and it kind of just makes me think of when somebody's coming in and they create a library and they create the folder structure, they might be creating that folder structure for what they think is best. But then down the road, they leave the company or they move to a different position and somebody else comes in and they may not necessarily agree on that folder structure, but they're kind of stuck to it unless they want to try to pull all the documents out of the library and then completely reorganize it. And that just kind of makes it difficult. So a lot of times what ends up happening is, there's duplication of folders, there's folders nested, 10 deep. So it can kind of just be really, really tricky and get out of hand very easily. And that's kind of where metadata, and specifically managed metadata, comes in to kind of help us organize this and keep it in a structure that is, if somebody new does take over, it's easy for them to pick up, make changes to, and keep kind of building on top of. So just kind of a neat thing. Let's go ahead. So this is, and this is, I have to give Laura credit for this. So this is a presentation I've been doing a long time, and I had a really simple example here, and Laura spruced it up for me on one of our,
I love that
sessions with these awesome superhero references. So what is metadata? So we know just kind of from the beginning, we know that metadata is data about data, so real easy. And it's typically, when we think of it in terms of technology, it's the attributes of a document or an item inside of a system. So we have this kind of fun example. We have Green Lantern and Deadpool, and we have these different things which could be essentially columns in a list. So we have color, year created, real name, power, and whether they're cool or not. And then we have the metadata, which is actually the properties of each of those. And my favorite part is that Green Lantern is not cool, and Deadpool is cool. That makes me laugh.
But they're both Ryan Reynolds.
But they're both Ryan Reynolds, exactly. So there's some shared metadata, something that they have in common. But yeah, just kind of an easy way to kind of think about what is metadata. So we don't take too much time on this one, but just kind of a fun way to kind of remember what we're talking about here. So we know in SharePoint specifically that metadata is represented in a couple of different ways. One of the first things, like when you're learning SharePoint, when you're first building your lists or libraries, or you're kind of first getting in there and understanding how it works, we know that metadata is most often represented in list and library columns. And we know that those things can be created directly on the lists or libraries. We also know that default columns, so that there are SharePoint just out of the box when a library or list is created just has some default columns, and those are things like the creation date, who it was created by, modified date, modified by, and the ID of the item. So these are just regular columns. That's metadata, but it's just the columns that kind of come with a list or library. And then we also have site columns. So let's say typically, and this is kind of just like in the order of which you kind of learn SharePoint, you'll start off with list and library columns, and then as you start to learn more, you realize that you can create columns at the site level that you can reuse in multiple lists and libraries. So you can begin creating those things at that level, and that's also metadata. We know that there are different types of columns, and those things you can see the same types in whether it's a site column or a list library column. Those are things like, choice, text, dates, currency, people, lookups. And specifically, what we're going to be focusing on today is that one of those column types is managed metadata. And the managed metadata is all kind of stored in the term store, which will be a big focus of the session today. And so we create the term sets, we create the terms, we set their properties, and do everything we need to do in the term store. And then basically we can go over and either on our list or library level or at our site level, we can create a column that will utilize that information. And lastly, on this slide, I just want to point out that they can be global, right? So if you're using Office 365, you probably are familiar with the fact that the Office 365 comes with a content type hub, the SharePoint Online. It comes with a content type hub. Previously, if you were on premise, you would always have to kind of create your content type hub and set it up, but Office 365 comes with one. A content type hub can be used to not only store content types globally for all of your site collections, but it can also be used to store site columns. And also your term store can be managed from this content type hub or actually from any site collection level. You can get into the term store as long as you have permissions, and we'll talk about that, and be able to manage the terms and term sets in there globally. All right. And Laura, you'll let me know if there's any questions or anything like that, just because I'm probably not good.
Yeah, someone's asking if we could have a session later on best practices in SharePoint branding. I don't know anything about branding, but maybe you do. You definitely know more than I know.
Yeah, so I know I am not the person who does the branding, but I do know ways that people are doing branding nowadays, specifically with things like Office 365 and stuff like that. But maybe there's somebody we can maybe talk to one of our folks out there to join.
DRC actually offered to come on here, and I forgot about that, and talk about branding. So we'll talk about that later. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good idea. All right. So let's move right along. So this is kind of just showing what we talked about. So the default metadata in the screenshot, hopefully you guys can see that with the resolution, but we can see here we have modified, modified by, content type, created, created by. That's just kind of that default metadata that comes with a list or library when it's created and automatically applied to an item. And then the column types, as I mentioned, there's a big list of them there. There's even more options if you're, creating those columns from the site level, specifically if you're dealing with like a publishing site. But all of those different column types there that you guys are probably pretty familiar with, including at the very bottom, manage metadata. All right, so we know that's just kind of a high level overview of what is metadata, where does it apply inside of SharePoint. But now we're going to start getting into what this session's actually about, which is manage metadata. So why do we recommend manage metadata? Why is it something that we like to say or have people use as they're starting to build out SharePoint sites? And there's a couple of different reasons here. One of the biggest things is that it's just better organization. You can use like the terms and the term sets. You can create, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but you can create a group. You can give specific people, and not the same as Office 365 group. Those are two different things. But you can create a group in the term store and give people access to that, and then let them manage all their terms underneath that group. And so that way they may not be able to manage. Like sometimes I've had situations where I might have a group for HR and then a group for IT, and they have all these different term sets underneath that that they can manage, but then they couldn't go over and touch the terms being used under IT. So it's just better organization because it's global. When you go into the term store and you create it at that global level, and then it can be used throughout the site. And also you kind of have like a tree structure, so you get some of that organization. So let's say if you don't, a lot of times people who are creating choice columns, maybe they want to be able to choose like the city or the state is Georgia, and then the cities are Atlanta and Savannah, but they can't do that in a regular choice column. But you could do that with managed metadata. So that's just kind of stuff like that. Of course, more control, as I mentioned, with the groups and stuff like that. You can actually designate who can edit these terms, who can manage them, and you can kind of set that up all within the term store. Oh, unlike with like a choice column, like we were talking about, With a choice column, it's kind of just whoever has access to that, to manage that list or library, is going to have access to change those terms. And that may not always be the best way to do it, especially if it's something that's being used across the board. And then one of the things that I tend to lean on managed metadata a lot for is just its enhanced discoverability. That's a big word. And usability. And it's just because there is so much you can do with search with managed metadata. I lean on it a lot for a lot of the search rollups that I do, or just the term-driven pages and stuff like that. Just being able to do that stuff so easily with managed metadata really, really helps. A lot of times it's stuff you would think you could only do with like code, and it really kind of comes in handy for that and just makes it easier. And then, of course, as we mentioned a few times, managing it globally. So I can have the term store and a content type hub, and I can let that stuff be available over many, many site collections. So it doesn't limit me. I don't have to just have one site collection. I can have many site collections if I have a very, very large intranet or footprint in SharePoint. All right. So I like to just kind of go through some of these ideas just before we actually start digging into the term store, just to kind of give you guys some insight. So one of the things a couple of years ago that kept coming up when people would want to talk about taxonomy, and they would want to talk about things like information architecture and stuff like that, is this whole idea of taxonomy versus folksonomy, and what that means. And taxonomy, as we kind of formally know it, is just this very, very structured classification system. And a lot of times when we think of SharePoint, we can think of things like, the list of departments in a company, or the list of, something that's very, very structured list of terms or items that doesn't change very often. That's typically going to be a taxonomy, and it's also something that is usually pretty tightly controlled. So it's probably like something that HR manages, or something that the SharePoint admin manages, and nobody else is really going to be contributing to that or adding terms to it, because it's just this very structured thing. Whereas on the other hand, we have folksonomy, which is more of a free-flowing way of classifying items, and we typically see this a lot with in the real world, I guess you would say. We would see this a lot with things like Twitter and the hashtags that are used there, and then just trending topics and stuff like that. So that's kind of a real world example of folksonomy. And in SharePoint, we see that with the enterprise keywords, which is the ability to basically create a column on a list or library and allow users to tag different words or phrases as they feel. And those things end up in a specific term set in the term store. So that's just more folksonomy. Well, also we see that maybe not so much, because I know it's kind of changed with Delve and stuff like that, but I know that originally when we had the new 2013 My Sites, there was the ability to do hashtags and different stuff like that inside of posts in the news feed and things.
Oh, those things that no one ever used?
Yeah. That no one ever used, exactly right. But yeah, those hashtags end up in the term store as well. But like I said, that's kind of not really used, and probably going away quite a bit with all the Delve changes and everything. However, the enterprise keywords are still very much there, and are very, very are often used by people. And so the reason that I talk about that, these subjects, is because managed metadata allows us to do both. So it allows us to have this really, really tightly controlled taxonomy, and then it also allows us to have a little bit of that folksonomy and kind of let people decide how they want to categorize things or tag things for people to be able to search and find. So that's kind of why we like to talk about that, because you'll get to see a little bit of that as we go through, because both of those things apply. I would say most of the time people are using taxonomy, but the folksonomy is there. All right, we'll take a quick break. Is there any questions or anything?
Well,
are we just talking about?
Leonard has said, "What if you can't create groups and manage metadata?" And I asked, a question, can't create them because someone hasn't given you admin access, and they're typing. So I might
Okay.
just wait till they finish typing. Oh, they said, yes, we have site collection admins, but the people that own our SharePoint only created groups for the site collection, but they will not allow other term groups in the managed metadata. So are
Yeah.
you asking how to get around that?
Yeah, unfortunately, if they're not, they would have to set them up or give you the access to set them up. So it might be just a conversation if, you say, okay, we want to set up groups that are for these different things, and then they can go ahead and put those out there and set you as the manager on those groups. And then you'd be able to kind of get in and create terms and term sets and
Yeah,
stuff
it's
like
like
that.
it's like a political thing. You just have to have a
Yeah,
conversation and explain why you need it, and that you can control it. I mean, you can be the admin, and you can even make it so that it's a closed group and things like that to make it so that it doesn't go out of control, I guess. But that's going to be a matter of you having to get, get them to let you do it.
yeah, that's a big part of it. All right. So the term store has, as we've kind of talked about, it has a tree structure. I'm going to switch over in a minute and actually show you the term store. But we have, as we're talking about here, we have groups, and groups are just really just the ability to be able to kind of categorize things, and then also set people that can manage anything underneath that group. And so I used the example earlier of having a group for like different departments. So a group for HR and all their terms, a group for IT and all their terms. And so that's kind of an easy way to do it. You then have a term set underneath that. So you can think of a term set could be departments, and then the term underneath that. And as you can see, basically the group, the term set, and the term, they all have different settings that are available, and we'll kind of talk through those as we go through this. The term definitely has the most settings, but the term set and the group have things like, setting people that are managers, or whether or not it's closed or open, and we can chat through that a little bit. And actually, before I go here, let's go ahead and switch over and actually look at the site. So I'm in a modern site, so this is a little bit flipped, but typically you're going to find the term store under site administration and term store management. And of course, it's got me logged out, so I got to sign back in. So we have, at the very top level, I always like to kind of review this because there is some helpful stuff, but basically at the very top level of the term store, this is where the term store administrator is set up. So this is where you're given permission to be the term store administrator if that is your role. Also, what's kind of cool up at the top level is this sample import file. I like to point this out because some people miss it. Basically, this is just a CSV file that you can download. That if you wanted to create a term set, but you didn't want to have to manually sit here and add each individual term, let's say the term set had hundreds of terms in it, you could put it into the sample import file, and then when you're creating your term set, you can right click, and let's do one on the group level, and then you can do import term set and actually upload that file. So that's just something I like to point out, just kind of a neat, helpful thing, pretty easy to use. And I've used that a lot when helping.
We have some people that are actually using the YouTube chat instead of the Slack chat, and they're kind of trying to ask questions, which I didn't realize anybody was over there. What permissions do you need to access the top of the term store?
If you're not a site collection administrator, you would need to be added as a term store administrator. So that would be to have the top level. You would need to be added here.
There you go, Anne. Come on over to Slack where the rest of us are. There's an app on your phone that you can use if your firewall's blocking it.
But yeah, so we have that. We also basically, as we talked about in the slide, you have groups, term sets, and then terms. So if I want to create a new group, I can right click at the top level and go ahead and create a new group. And this would be the term store administrator would have to set this up initially. And I'll just call this group IT terms. And then once I create the group, I can go ahead and add in the group managers. And this is where you could go ahead and if you didn't want somebody to be the term store administrator, you just want them to be able to manage the terms under this group, then you could add them here. There's also the contributors, and I think they also are able to edit. And so you can kind of add people either as a manager or a contributor. And then really at the group level, there's just a description and then the GUID, that kind of thing. There's not too many settings at that level. So what we'll do is I'm going to go up where I already have some term sets created. So I'm going to click here. And if I wanted to go ahead and create a term set, I could just right click and either do a new term set to create it manually, or as I mentioned, import term set to import it with that CSV file. I already have one created here, so I'm going to go ahead and just click on that. So here's a term set. It's called benefits. In that term set, I can even set the owner of this specific term set if I wanted to, contact, and then stakeholders as well. I don't really use those very often. For the most part, I think the most I do is typically at the group level, just kind of setting a group manager. But one thing on this that is pretty important or good to know is this submission policy. So when you create a term set, you can determine whether or not people can add terms to it from the actual like from the library. So if you create a term set, you add it as a managed metadata column at the library, and then somebody's going to go ahead and they're going to be typing in a value into that field. This will determine whether or not you will let them do that or not. So closed means that they won't be able to. They can only choose the terms that are underneath this term set. So like these have two here. And open means that they'll be able to add not any term, so this is where it gets tricky, but any other term in your entire term store. So that means that it's not just like anything that they want, it has to be something that exists somewhere else in the term store. But you can do that. And one of the ways is certain situations we've had where people wanted to have an open submission policy where people could, submit, put in the terms that they felt most applied, but they may not have a ton of stuff in their term store to choose from. And what's really, really cool is actually if you go out there and look up, there is, and Laura, you might know the exact name of it, but there is basically a import file that has.
Yeah, I'll go find that and put the link in the chat window.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, I think me free just put it in there. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Already. One step ahead of you. Oh, we do have a question too though. Spats says, I've never been happy with the out-of-the-box management tools for Term Store, and do we know of any third-party tools that can be helpful?
I don't, unfortunately.
I don't know of any.
Yeah. But yeah, so the general text. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just said PowerShell.
PowerShell, yeah. I mean, honestly, that is the only thing that I can think of that works with it. But yeah, so the general taxonomy that BeFree put into the chat there. So that can basically, that's just that CSV file that I mentioned earlier, but it's a CSV file that comes packed with all kinds of taxonomy in it. So if I expand this here, so you guys can see it, it basically is broken down into some common things that are inside of a business, so like human resources and stuff like that. And then it just has like tons of different terms and phrases and stuff like that that are typically used in just a general business taxonomy. So you can go ahead and import this, and then if you did create a column that had an open submission policy, your users would be able to use any of these terms. And they would see those just from doing the type ahead search. So they'd start typing in like, I want to tag it with database development. They'd start typing that, and that term would be available because it's in the term store. And you can use this. You could also just create a column that points directly to this general business taxonomy. Either way, it works. I've done it both ways. But that's just kind of a helpful thing that you can kind of put out here in your term store just to kind of beef it up a little bit. And as you saw, there's the link out there for downloading that in Slack. So then also with the term set level, we have intended use. So at any time, if you no longer wanted the terms in this term set to be available for tagging, let's say you're retiring it or something like that, then you can go ahead and uncheck that. And then something else that we're going to talk about if we have time, if not, we'll do a whole nother session on it, is this term set for site navigation and term set for faceted navigation. So this is just where you're going to say, let's say if I knew that I was going to use this term set to manage either the global navigation at the top or the quick launch left navigation, I could go ahead and set that here, click that here. And then if I was using it for faceted, which basically is the refinement panel and all that fun stuff, I can go ahead and click that here. And like I said, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Gary says, why is IT terms below the dashed line? I guess that's that. Yeah, explain what that is down there.
It just does that momentarily. And then if I come back to the term store, it's going to be back up here under the text. Yeah, it just temporarily puts it there. I don't know. Can't really explain why. But then if I did come back, like save and get out of the term store and come back later, it would be back up here with the rest. Not really sure why it does it. It's only something I see, I think, in Office 365. I don't think it does that in on-prem. So yeah, those are those two options. We have custom sort order as well. So basically what it will do is whenever you put your terms in here, it's going to put them in the alphabetical order per your language. And if you don't want that to be the order, I've had built out like a project site for a customer, and they needed it to basically the term set was phases, and they had like these very specifically named phases of their projects, and they needed it to be in the order of those phases. So then I just use custom sort order, and I can come in here. It's very similar to ordering a list or a list view. I can come in here and create that order for them. And then
also asking about when creating a term store set for a site collection. I guess what and where and how and why would you do that too? It's like when you go to the term store from within central admin, you get sort of this admin view, but then when you're in a site collection, you could just have a term store for that site collection. So what's that all about?
So the term store for the site collection, I think it's only applying now into on-prem, right? If I'm not mistaken, because I don't think it works like that in Office 365 any longer, but I could be wrong. But yeah, you can create it at different levels. So you can either create it at that top level taxonomy level as we have here, this is at the top level, meaning that it's going to be available across all site collections in the term store. And then you also, if you are, I think it's on-prem, if you have different site collections, you can actually create term sets and stuff at the site collection level, and you would see the site collection as an option down here underneath that dash line. And then you could create term sets and stuff at that level as well. So it really just depends on the need and how how things are set up. It's hard for me to say like you need to do it this way or that way because it just depends on the situation. And
yeah, I guess if you have no control at the top level and your only option is to do it at the site collection level, what I've seen is if you go into, you're doing a manage metadata field in a site, and if you when you're creating the manage metadata field, if you, instead of selecting an existing manage metadata term store, you select the option that's something like created on the fly or something like, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So that's the only way that I've seen to make it create one in a site collection. I think it does still do that in Office 365 too.
It does. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, so that's kind of answers that. But I think that some people have often ask, like, once it does create that and you see the site collection listed here, do you continue to create things there or at the global level? And I think that really just depends on what it is and what you're trying to create. And custom properties, we'll talk a little bit more about as we get into the terms and stuff like that. So let's go ahead. Let me go back to the presentation. So this is kind of a neat chart just kind of showing a couple examples of some of the terms and term sets we typically see. So you have a group, which is the company group, or it could be a department level group. You have one term set, which is just locations. We have, as you can see underneath that, it has regions, west and east. Underneath that, it has states, and then underneath that, it has cities. And you can create that kind of a nested hierarchy inside of a term set. Same thing down here. And then we also have business taxonomy, and then we have HR, and under HR we have benefits, and under benefits we have dental and health. So you can really create that structured hierarchy right within the term store. And then when you're creating your column, you can actually point to any part of that hierarchy. So let's say if you created a column and it was a benefits column, you could come right to the term store, click benefits, and then when your users are using that column, they're only going to see the things underneath benefits. Or you could set it at the higher level at HR and then make all of that available to them. So you have that option when you're creating these hierarchies. All right, so I think we already kind of talked through adding a group and a term set. So I'll kind of skip over that for now since we chatted through that. So the actual terms, we know that these are specific words or phrases that you can tag a document or item with. In the settings, so we'll take a look, we have the available for tagging, just like for the term set itself, we can decide whether or not it's available. We also have language, so you can set up terms for different languages if you have a multilingual site. Description, we have the default label, which is basically just kind of the name of the term or the term itself. And then we have what's really helpful is other labels, which are like synonyms. So we'll talk about that in a second. Membership, and then finally custom properties. And then we have a couple of different options that we can do with terms once they're created. When you right click on a term, it can be copied, so it can just be copied from one term set to another. It can be reused or pinned, and we'll talk about more detail in just a second. It can be merged with another term. It can be deprecated, moved,
Hey Joelle, can you hear me?
Just moved from one term set to another, deleted, totally deleted, shaken, not stirred. But really the two that you would probably use the most, and that can be a little confusing, is the reuse option and then the pin option.
Hello?
So when you reuse a term, and that means that you have a term in a term set and you want to reuse it somewhere else in a different term set. This means that when you reuse it, it's basically, it's not duplicated, it's just one term, but it's available in both places. And when it's reused, that means it can be edited from both places. So let's say if HR is using the term of West region or something. So HR has West region, and then IT is like, hey, we need that in our term set as well. So they can reuse West region over in their term set. And if it was reused, then it could be modified. So IT could change it and HR could change it. It wouldn't matter. Whereas we also have pin, which is kind of the opposite. So a pin allows you it would allow IT to use the term West region, but they could not change it. So they couldn't make it, Western region. It'd always be West region. And if they needed any changes to it, they'd have to tell HR, and then HR could go in and make a change to it. So you have reuse basically means I can edit it from any location it's put in, and then pin means I can only edit it from the location it was originally created. And by location, of course, we mean term set. So yeah, Laura, I don't think I can hear you. So I think that, so I can't hear you for some reason. That's strange. That may be from the Skype side though. All right, so I'll just keep going, and then maybe we can figure out why I can't hear Laura. So when we talk about a term, we have a couple of different things that will run across the top of our term settings. So we have general, custom sort, navigation, term-driven pages, faceted navigation, and then custom properties. All right, so it looks like there are questions. So let me pause for just a second and let me see if I can go look and see what the questions are. Let's see. It looks like people are asking about cascading dropdowns for using this for a cascading dropdown. It kind of meets the requirement, but not fully. So it's not. Basically, it's going to give you if like let's say if you wanted it to be like region and then state and then city. When you would click on that, you're going to be able to see regions and then all the states underneath them and then all the cities underneath them. It's not going to be something like a true cascading dropdown where if I make a selection in region, then it narrows that down in another column, etc. But it does kind of meet the requirement because you can have that nested hierarchy. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but it's not exactly like a cascading dropdown in the sense that we would use in a form, an info path or something like that. But definitely something, there are ways to do cascading dropdowns out there, especially just real simple ways to do it with JavaScript. So that might be something to look into. Yeah, and hopefully that was the question. I'm just trying to harder for me to keep track because there's a lot of conversation going on. But hopefully I can do that. Okay, so I'm going to keep chatting through this. So term store management. So these are the different options that we have with a term. So we have general. This is where you can just set basic information and the synonyms and things like that. The custom sort, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's alphabetic or a manual sort. Navigation. So if you have set a term set to be for site navigation, this is where you would go in and make changes and get that all configured. Term-driven pages, same thing. And then faceted navigation, once again, if you set that up, if you say that the term set is for faceted navigation, that would be where you configure it. And then custom properties. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think sorry, I'm trying to read and do like 3 things at once to try to keep up. But yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that there's just a lot of benefit to it. I mean, it's easier to manage. There's things that you can do at search very, very simply. Whereas if I'm just using a regular site column, that's a choice. It's a little bit more complicated to do. So I just kind of feel like it's a better use for that. I mean, the managed metadata is just better for managing metadata. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right. So we'll just go back over real quick. Talk about terms. So I'm going to go to one that I have all the fun stuff turned on for. So this is a term here. This term specifically, to create a term, obviously I can right click. Hold on a second. And I can create term on a term set. I can also, as we mentioned earlier, can import the spreadsheet. And then I have all of those different options, which I talked about just a bit ago for the term. Once it's created, you can copy it, pin it, reuse it, and all that fun stuff. So with the term, as I mentioned, you can make it available for tagging. We also have the synonyms. So here, what you can do is you can create synonyms. So let's say if this was New York City, and we know that somebody might type in NYC, and we want it to just all be linked to the same thing, we can go ahead and create a label called NYC that will, if they typed NYC in that Gotcha. This is only applicable to the user as they are tagging content, right? So as they're actually uploading a document and they're typing into those fields to try to tag content, this is where this is applied. This does not apply to search. So there is an entire, which this is something I learned last year, that there is an entire other synonym management piece that will apply to search. So you can take these same synonyms and you can basically, there's a PowerShell script you can run with all the synonyms that will then apply to search. So then that way, if they searched NYC or New York, they would get the same results. Whereas right now, as a default, it's going to be two different results. So that's just kind of a weird gotcha that I found out last year. So definitely something to keep in mind. And I can go, oh, now, can you guys hear me? Jeez. Can you hear me now? Okay, so I'll keep going. I guess I'm not able to hear Laura anymore. So hopefully her and I aren't talking over each other. But yeah, so the synonyms, there's a PowerShell script. I'll put that into the Slack channel if you guys are interested in the search synonyms versus just the end user tagging synonyms, because those are two different things. All right, so besides synonym, we have navigation. Once you have marked a term set for navigation, then you get all of these different options. So you have the ability to say whether it's in the global navigation across the top, or whether this is going to be current navigation or quick launch. You then have the ability to say, is it just this, like, are you just this navigation that you're setting up? Is it just the link just goes to a general link, whether it's a page or a site inside of SharePoint, or maybe something completely outside of SharePoint. So you can either do simple link or header, or you can do term-driven page with friendly URL, which is something that we probably won't get to today just looking at the time, but we'll do another session on, because I can actually I want to walk you guys through like a fully creating a term-driven page and all the stuff that goes with it. So yeah, you can either choose one or the other there. And then, so that's just the general navigation. If you do choose term-driven page with friendly URL, then you have this secondary tab here. On this secondary tab, you can actually do what they call a friendly URL. So let's say, most of the time we're used to like a page being, /technology /site pages /audio.aspx, kind of a long URL. But you can come in here and just make it /audio. So kind of cutting out some of that, the exact library and page and all that stuff. So you can just do /audio, and then if your user types that in, they come right to the right page. So it's just a friendly URL. And you can do that whether or not you're using the target pages and the term-driven pages, doesn't really matter. You can come in and set a friendly URL for your managed navigation. So here, under term-driven pages, and we'll talk more about this, this is where we basically tell it, if we are doing one where we're letting the managed navigation kind of manage what's on a page, we can tell it what page template to point to, and then it will populate all that stuff for us, and we'll get there a little bit later. So that's where that's set up. Faceted navigation kind of goes hand in hand with term-driven pages. This allows us to basically have a refiner web part on a page and tell it to use the exact same refiners for all of the terms in our term set. So like if all of our terms were items in our navigation, and I click audio or I click visual, basically telling it here that, if it has a refinement web part on the page, to use the same refiners. And that's kind of where this gets set up. And then finally, custom properties. So custom properties, we can create custom properties and then display them on a term-driven page, or really any page. So we can say, if this term, then we could put its description, like this is audio, which is a technology for this made-up company. So the description is just all about the audio team. Basically, just making sure, I'm looking over to make sure that people can still hear me. Yeah, I guess hopefully they can. But yeah, and so we can also do, like, I could add in, the general manager and put in their name, and then I can actually take these items and display those in a term property web part on one of my term driven pages. So that's kind of a neat thing there. That's what custom properties are for. So just in general, though, when you're just kind of starting with managed metadata, I wanted to kind of quickly chat through all those options. But just in general, what you probably need to know is just creating the term and then basically maybe creating some synonyms. That's probably a good place to get started. So you create your term, create your synonyms, and then go ahead and create your columns, which we'll get to in just a second. So out of the box, some of the term sets that you guys are going to find out in your, before you even start touching your taxonomy, your term set, and creating all that stuff, you're going to see some different groups and term sets. So we have a people group, and then we have a system group that you will find, and these are out of the box. Underneath the people group, these are things that are getting populated through your profile, your user profile service. So there's things like department, job title, and location. So those things are populated if you have like an AD sync. That's populating your user profile. That's also coming over here. So you'll see the departments, the job titles, and the locations. You also have the system, which has the hashtags, as Laura and I talked about kind of in the beginning of the session. You have this idea in the old news feeds and the profiles where you could do a hashtag and create a term of your liking. And those would get stored here under system. And then keywords, that's enterprise keywords. So in any list or library where you go in the settings and turn on enterprise keywords, any keywords that are tagged in that column are stored here, which is good to know. It's good to kind of check this from a governance perspective. Maybe you want to make sure that people aren't putting things that are not necessarily inappropriate. I mean, because we know nobody ever does anything inappropriate. But maybe misspelled or the wrong abbreviation or something like that. You can go into keywords and update those and fix those. And then also it might just be a good place. Looking at keywords may be a good place to build some additional taxonomy off of. And then orphan terms. So if something is pinned or reused and gets deleted and it has stuff tied to it, it'll end up under orphan terms. All right, so how do we use all this stuff that we talked about? So we only have about a few minutes left, but I want to just at least get you started with managed metadata column, and then also with enterprise keywords, and then we'll save the rest for another session. So managed metadata column, you can either create this at the site column level, or you can create it right at a list or library, as we talked about. It just depends on, do you feel like you're going to need to reuse this over and over again throughout your site? Then I would do it at the site column level. Or does it just apply at this list or library? Then you could do it at the list or library level. It allows users, you can connect to the term set that's already created. So one of the things we've already done in the term store, or as Laura mentioned earlier, you can actually create a local term set right there as you're building the column. One really cool thing is that quick edit can now be used to assign terms. That kind of came with 2013. It used to not be able to be. You cannot use quick edit with a managed metadata column. You can now. Very cool. And you can also, as we talked about, use the term set submission policy to allow people to enter their own terms. And that's all goes back to folksonomy. So let's go ahead and create one of these columns. So in my document library here, so I have a document library. I want to go ahead and create a column. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to use the modern view, so hopefully you guys can see this. I know my display is a little funky, so it may not actually let me click at the same time. Sorry, I have my display set pretty high, my resolution set pretty high. But yeah, so I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. So we'll go to library settings and create column. So I'm going to call this, I'm trying to think of what's in my term store. I'll actually leave the name blank for a second because I need to see which one I'm going to do. So I'm going to choose Manage Metadata. I'll come back up and title in a second. When I choose Manage Metadata, I can make the field a multiple value field, so I can allow multiple values. Keep in mind, if you allow multiple values on a Manage Metadata column, you will not be able to group by that column. So that's just a little gotcha. If it's not multiple values, you can group by a Manage Metadata column, but if it is, you cannot. You can even display the label, which is just the actual term, or if in certain situations, like in that cascading drop down, one of my clients I've actually done displaying the path, so that way they could see like the state is, or the region is west, the state is California, the city is San Diego, and they could actually see that path in the column itself. So that's just, and I've also used that with workflows and stuff as well in the past. So then if I expand my term store here, we'll just do benefits. So I'm going to choose benefits as the term set that I want to point to, and I'll use that. And then I could do allow fill-in choices is grayed out because the submission on that is closed. But if it was open, then I could do allow fill-in choices. And then the default value here. And now that's added. And it should just be right here. There it is. So now this is the modern view, as you guys are probably noticing. So I can either put this into quick edit, and I can tag these columns. So both of these are managed metadata columns. I can either start typing here and then get a selection, or my users can click here and they can add them from this as well. So if I click this, then I get the whole list of options for that specific term set. And then I can even select multiple in the quick edit, and you can like fill in, if all of these are West region, I can select them and fill them in with the same term using these different options here. So I could do that. Let's actually get it to select for me. Let me click done. I also can, let's see here, do the information panel, which is the modern view, and I can edit. And I can also edit one by one. So here I can click here, and this is what it would look like in the modern view form. And so I can add those in directly from there. I can click the little icon and select them, and then I can go ahead and add these into this document's metadata. So it's pretty similar to the way it was before, and we have those things are now tagged. We also can, we'll kind of switch back over since we only have a few minutes. So enterprise keywords is a setting that we can turn on a list or library. And it allows you to basically create this column on your list or library that enables users to tag anything that they want in a column to kind of categorize a document or an item. So if I add this to my library, be interesting to see if it's still in modern view. It is. Let's see, it didn't add it to that though, so let's see. Let me edit this view. So yeah, I went ahead and added that, and so I can also just do quick edit again. And I can type anything in here, so I can type in power hour. And what that will do is, so that will tag that document with that term, and it will also add it to that specific keywords that I have in my term store under the system group. So I can always go there and manage them later. And those can be turned on any list or library, so users can kind of have that folksonomy and tag with whatever they feel best kind of suits this. Just be careful. You want to definitely do some training around this. I have had certain situations where people, tag like sentences, which you can do, but may not look the best on your view or wherever you have your list set up or library set up. So just something to keep in mind. Maybe only keep it to like 2 or 3 words at the most, if it's a phrase. So we only have like 1 minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. One of the next things that I want to start going into, and we'll do a second, so we'll do another session on it. I'll talk to Laura. I know I can't hear her, but I'll talk to her about it. But one of the so one of the next sessions that we'll do will be on managed navigation, and I'll go through all the details of setting this up. And if I can show you guys real quick. So basically, I have this navigation here, this audio and visual page. And these are completely being driven. The description of them, the refiners, everything that's coming back here is being completely driven by the managed metadata and also by the managed metadata navigation and term-driven pages and all that stuff. So I'm going to do a session where I walk through how to set this all up. And I'll go ahead and I will be quiet now and hand it over